women from the get-go. You control women, you control the world.
Yeah. I loved. I don't know if you happened to see Meet the Press yesterday, but Jim DeMint tried to say, oh well, some women might, be happy to have a free, sonogram or whatever. And Rachel Maddow pointed out, no, this is not. This is forced on you. This isn't choosing to have this done. This is a mandatory transvaginal probe, right?
Yes, and I've had them, and they're not pleasant, believe me.
Yes, I listen.
Mine were necessary,
believe you, and I know.
And I didn't like it when I volunteered for it.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just second that, sister. Amen. All right, 58, not even with box wine and someone telling you you're pretty, it's not okay. 58 minutes after the hour, right back on the Stephanie Miller Show.
At YMCA Summer Camp, where we believe in no child left inside. Arts, enrichment, sports, adventure, day camping, and wilderness. The summer for adventure has arrived. Do not be left behind. The Y is for everyone. Financial assistance is available. YMCAWNC.org.
Classic Cuts.
Rock and roll may be a young person's music, but it's never really too late to make it in the business. Bob Seger was a late bloomer, which is the thought behind his song, Against the Wind.
I felt like I made it so late in life. But when I was 35, I had the feeling it could end at any minute, This is unusual. I'm older now and still running against the wind. Classic Cuts.
What do your status updates say? What if every ounce of your being helped update the status of a person? And in turn, they did the same for you. Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps. Get interactive at peacecorps.gov/game.
Hey! iHeartRadio wants your feedback.
Click thumbs up or down whenever you hear a song.
And your feedback will help enhance your iHeartRadio listening experience.
From ABC News, I'm Stephen Portnoy. They were the best of the best, the elite firefighters they call hotshots, who dive into the flames to try to prevent them from spreading. In Arizona yesterday, 19 of them lost their lives trying to beat back a ferocious wildfire. ABC's Alex Stone is in the town of Prescott.
What's so tough for crews here right now, the firefight has to continue. This fire is raging out of control, so firefighters who may have been impacted by the loss of colleagues are on the fire line today working to contain the flames. Federal resources are on the way and should begin to help out local crews, but the fire keeps growing.
6,000 acres at last report, 0% contained. Deadly protests in Egypt over the weekend. 5 people reported killed, the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood torched. The demonstrators want President Mohamed Morsi to go, and the Egyptian military's just given politicians 48 hours to sort this out, or else. In Africa last hour, ABC News asked President Obama, should Morsi step down?
In his first public warning to Egypt's embattled President Morsi, President Obama firmly insists Morsi must start listening to his political critics.
Democracies don't work when everybody says it's the other person's fault and I want 100% of what I want.
President Obama says the U.S. is very concerned about the safety of American embassies and consulates. Cairo protests preceded the deadly Benghazi attack. Stephen?
ABC's Ann Compton traveling with the president in Tanzania, where tomorrow President Obama and former President George W. Bush will lay a wreath at the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania, where 11 people were killed in a terrorist bombing in '98. No transit service today in San Francisco. Transit workers on strike.
The issues are wages, contributions to pensions and health care, and safety issues as well. And according to union leaders, they are extremely far apart on all issues, specifically wages and safety.
ABC's Kim McAllister. You're listening to ABC News.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years will thingify them and make them things. And therefore they will exploit them and poor people generally, economically. And a nation that will exploit economically will have to have foreign investments and everything else, and it will have to use its military might to protect them. All of these problems are tied together.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
I was really staggered that a United States congressman, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, actually could go on national television and make up an accusation, literally fabricated out of whole cloth, namely that I have threatened to uncover the names of covert CIA agents, as a way of arguing for my arrest and prosecution inside the United States for the crime of...
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. In the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is at a crucial stage. Please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
Stay tuned to We Act Radio, Washington, D.C.'s only independent radio station. Catch us online at weactradio.com.
They were saying when they think you cannot hear. If you understood what they do, if for you it was so clear. If you knew they shut down the factory in an economic ruse. If you could kiss the cheek of the child in the sweatshop that made your shoes. Every time we went to war to fight our evil foes, they told you we were really fighting for the good of CEOs. If you could feel the hunger of the many, see the riches of the few. If they told it like it is, what if you knew?
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese.
And today we have a great show. We're going to talk about the exciting topic of trade. It is a hot issue. It is.
It actually is an unusually hot issue. Corporate, global coup that will affect every aspect of your life. So
That's right. That's right. But first, where's Snowden?
Where is Snowden? It's the new game. Well, the rumors are he's still in the Russian airport, and the good news, from my perspective, is that the the Venezuelan president, Maduro, is on his way to Russia.
Yeah, exciting. It'd be exciting if they offer him.
And he
asylum.
said that he was very sympathetic and wanted to offer him asylum. So it may be that his ticket out of Russia, maybe to Venezuela.
And I love that the president of Ecuador offered the United States $23 million a year for human rights education.
I love it, too. I'll tell you, if he wants to submit it to Popular Resistance, we'll set up the university.
There you go.
But I'll tell you, the other thing about Ecuador, I love the way they just, they started to get threatened about their trade status, and immediately the legislature said, we're going to unilaterally leave the trade agreement with the United States.
Yeah.
No blackmail.
They're not going to be bullied, right?
I love that.
Let's talk a little bit about Manning. A couple of interesting developments.
Well, his prosecution wraps up their case this week, and I think it was not as strong as people expected. There were definitely some weaknesses in their case. So there's supposed to be a strong motion to dismiss when the prosecution wraps up. This always happens after almost always happens when the case is finished by the prosecutor. But this sounds like Coombs will have a strong argument to dismiss at least some of the charges. So it should be interesting.
That would be great. And I thought it was interesting that the news was released recently that there was a soldier in Iraq who was convicted of murdering
in cold blood
an
Iraqi policeman,
and sentenced to 11 years in jail. And then they released him because they said it, and maybe you could be
7 days in solitary where he didn't get
access to a lawyer.
And Mr. Manning, of course, had about a year in solitary when you combine Middle East.
But even the time that he was held in Iraq, in the Middle East,
it was more than 7 days.
Exactly, it was a couple of months before he even knew what was going on.
Very interesting to see how the Court of Appeals handles Manning's argument on that issue if it gets there.
Yeah, it's like really, really unjust.
Really unjust.
The two cases. So let's talk about.
Largest protest in Egyptian history, maybe the largest in world history, and it's already having an impact.
Yeah, and that was the 1-year anniversary
of Morsi.
Of Morsi's reign, and they're calling for him to step down.
They're calling for three things: resign, early elections, and revoke the Constitution so they can redo it, because it's pretty much a Muslim Brotherhood Constitution.
Yeah, it gives him a lot of rights.
It's so interesting to see a Muslim country, dominant Muslim country, now revolting against kind of an Islamic state.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And you had 5 ministers resign today. And they've the protesters gave the Morsi government 48 hours to get their act together, or else. So we'll see what. There was talk of a general strike.
Right.
So we'll see what comes next. They're not done. They're certainly. They had more people sign petitions for Morsi to resign than voted for Morsi.
Right. Well, there you go. He's lost his legitimacy. So now there's a struggle in the United States for our rights, and one of them is the Fourth Amendment, right, to illegal search and seizure. So Restore the Fourth.
Restore the Fourth.
This July 4th. There are a lot of actions going on around the country.
That's right.
But here in D.C., if you want to join the mixtape bike ride, you can meet here at the We Act radio station at 1918 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue Southeast.
It is Martin Luther King and Good Hope Road.
That's right. And join here at the station at 5 p.m. and we'll go on an awesome
There's an
bike ride.
excellent promotional video out there. Very
some guy.
Hush, secret, whispering kind of NSA's out to get us video.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So you can probably check it out, weactradio.com.
Yeah.
So 5 p.m., Good Hope Road and MLK for the NSA mixtape bike ride.
Yep. Should be exciting. So let's get into our show because we have a lot to talk about. And our first guest this morning is Richard McIntyre. He's a professor of economics at the University of Rhode Island, where he teaches in the graduate program in labor relations. He's the author of Our Worker Rights, Human Rights, and he also serves as the United States Trade Representative for the Green Shadow Cabinet. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that you wrote an excellent statement just recently on greenshadowcabinet.us called With TPP, Obama has moved from transparency to secrecy, from human rights to corporate rights. So that's what we want to talk about this morning. Can you?
Sounds like you don't like the TPP.
Well, I mean, it's hard to like any of these trade agreements once you get to know them a little bit.
Yeah, and see what their effects are. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? What is the TPP?
Yeah, so it's the TransPacific Partnership, and this is something that started actually at the waning years of the Bush administration to expand an existing agreement that included a few countries on the Pacific Rim, but now actually would include quite a few countries. And in a way, it's because the World Trade Organization failed after Seattle to develop a multilateral agreement that the U.S. has pursued these country-by-country agreements, and now something a little bit bigger, something between a country-by-country agreement like the ones we have with Panama and Korea and Colombia, and a worldwide agreement. So this would include Vietnam, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, the U.S., Chile, Canada, Brunei, Australia. Japan, they don't know whether they want to play or not, but it's an East Asian so-called free trade agreement, or Pacific Rim so-called free trade agreement.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with it?
Well, what's been wrong with all of these agreements going back to NAFTA, which is that they're really misnamed. They're not about trade per se. They're about property rights and securing property rights for foreign investors and developing ways in which those foreign investors can enforce those property rights outside of the usual legal system. So, those of us who have a little gray hair remember the battle over NAFTA, and particularly the battle over Chapter 11, which was the protection for foreign investors, essentially. And that has become a feature of all of these agreements. And it gives corporations a way to make claims against governments that bypasses the democratic process completely, and is done in these kind of shadowy court situations outside the legal process.
Yeah, so people call it a corporate coup. Is that overstating things?
Well, I don't think it is, because we get all hung up, and economists are notorious for this. We get all hung up on, well, how many jobs will this agreement create, and how many jobs will it destroy, and blah, 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 etc. We have no idea what the answer to that question is, and it's the wrong debate. This is a debate, really, again, about property rights and about corporations having more rights than people do. And in a way, trade agreements have now become an end run around constitutions, both in the U.S. and in poor countries.
So let's break that down a little bit more. How, in particular, how would the TPP or these free trade agreements, how do they affect labor?
How do they affect labor? Well, that's kind of interesting, Margaret, because in the late 90s there was a lot of pressure to include trade and environmental standards in these trade agreements, labor and environmental standards, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens now. So you might think, well, that's a victory. It's kind of a hollow victory. Labor standards would be included in the TPP, just like they were in the agreements for Colombia, Panama, and South Korea, the individual country-by-country agreements. But the standards are quite vague. There's no enforcement mechanism. And according to what I understand from what's going on in the negotiations, this is mainly there for domestic political reasons in the United States. In other words, none of the poor country governments are interested in having labor standards in this agreement, but the Obama administration feels like it has to have vague, unenforceable standards in the agreement in order to try to pick off some labor support here in the United States. So on the one hand, labor and environmental standards are now in trade agreements as a matter of course. Their effectivity remains to be developed, though.
Well, and that's a good example. Colombia, since the Colombian Free Trade Agreement, we understand that conditions have significantly declined for the workers there, and that, again, the deaths are rising.
Those GM workers with their hunger strikes and
right.
The notion that you're going to solve the labor problem in Colombia by including standards in a trade agreement is ridiculous. If we know anything about the history of the assassination and murder of trade union activists and organizers in Colombia, this is a bad joke. So we'll see when the document is fully published. We haven't seen the full document yet. We've seen leaked chapters of the document, but I don't think, at least from what I understand right now, that we can take the labor standards in this agreement too seriously.
Yeah, I mean, and looking at the history with NAFTA, anyone who's arguing this is going to be good for our economy, good for wages, good for workers, I think is just, intentionally misleading or very ignorant. I mean,
NAFTA should have been called the Capitalist Property Right Protection Act.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it was really about, you had a government in Mexico at that time which was friendly to foreign capital, and it was a way of locking that friendliness into the Mexican Constitution through a treaty. So the idea was that companies wanted to move to Mexico, but they wanted to be sure that their property was going to be treated by the government in the same way it might be treated in the United States. From the Mexican side, I mean, that's a longer story and why Mexico was interested in NAFTA. But certainly from the point of view of American politics, it was corporations were interested in it to secure property rights.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit. Do we have
about a minute?
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about where labor is on this Trans-Pacific Partnership here in the United States.
Well, labor is ambiguous, and this is the problem with our the political situation in the United States. There's no labor party. Sometimes the Democrats pretend to be a labor party. One time in our history, they actually might have been. But it's been a long time since that was true. So labor thinks it has a friend in the White House, but that friend hasn't delivered anything for working people, really, in the U.S. I mean, very little. And yet, what's the alternative? So at this point, the AFL-CIO has not come out with a strong condemnation of the agreement. There's some proper skepticism, I think, but we'll see. And this is the problem of labor in the United States. The Democrats can treat labor like they have no place else to go because they have no place else to go.
Right, right, yeah. Well, let's take a quick break. And this song is called Free Trade. It's by the Riot Folk Collective.
The World Bank is a pointless institution. Its goal is nothing short of world control. They murder, lie, and desecrate small countries. They kill whole villages for gold, oil, and coal. The World Bank does not care about freedom. They support corrupt regimes in every land. They are privatizing third world food and water and killing off those who would dare take a stand. Oh, you've got to free the people before you free the trade and throw out your helping hand to lend. If you care about the people and you care about the trade, you'd stop these bastards before they kill again.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
June 27th is National HIV Testing Day.
HIV testing is fast, painless, and often free.
I've been tested for HIV.
I've been tested for HIV. Have you? To find an HIV testing center near you, visit greaterthan.org.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to DC's only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio, do something.
IMF is loaning sums of money to governments they know are full of crooks. Their SAPs are economic sabotage. They'd rather open markets than open books. They pull funding from health and education and insist on spending more on debt relief. It's been going on for years now unhindered, and it won't stop until we block off every street. Oh, you've got to free the people before you free the trade and throw out your helping hand to lend. If you care about the people and you care about the trade, you'd stop these bastards before they kill again.
Who's that?
That was Ryan Harvey with Riot Folk Collective.
You know, we just put an article up on itsoureconomy.us about the roots of the protests in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And he put this really solid article about how IMF and Lulu's hug of George W. Bush and neoliberalism was where the roots of the current protest. And I think that we're talking about now, TPP essentially puts in place neoliberal economics everywhere.
Right, and you're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese, who talked on the introduction.
And our guest right now is Richard McIntyre, and he serves as the U.S. Trade Representative for the Green Shadow Cabinet. He's author of a recent statement called "With TPP, Obama has moved from transparency to secrecy, from human rights to corporate rights."
And you can see that on the Green Shadow Cabinet.us, and that's part of a campaign that the Green Shadow Cabinet's doing. We started out with Margaret and I are both on the Green Shadow Cabinet. She's health, I'm justice. And it started out with a kind of a broad statement everybody signed, and then we went into specifics on lots of different issues, so people get in depth and to see how every issue we care about is really affected by the TPP, and we need to all join together. And we've started a campaign.
Right, we just launched it last night, just in time for July 1st. It's called Flush the TPP. It's a direct action campaign.
Flush the what? Never mind.
Flush the Toilet Paper Plus. It's everything but Toilet Paper Plus. It's total planetary power for the corporations. But anyway, so if you go to flushthetpp.org, it's a really an action-oriented website. You can take the pledge to take action. You can get ideas for actions, resources that you would need for those, and also there's a way that you can easily submit your action. We're calling for TPP Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, get out there somewhere and get visible and expose the TPP.
Because the previous U.S. Trade Representative, Ron Kirk said that if people know what's in it, it can't be signed because it's so unpopular.
Right, and OccuCard's just released as well this weekend a new OccuCard. It's OccuCards.com. It's a TPP OccuCard with a great graphic on the front. It's a postcard, and on the back it has information about the TPP and websites that you can check out. So go to OccuCards.com and you can order those, or you can even just download the PDF and print it yourself. But let's get back into this issue again.
Let's focus on you've talked about the TPP and its problems a little bit. There's so many we could spend a whole hour just going through the problems of TPP. But let's talk about what a sensible trade agreement would look like. I mean, we're not against trade between countries. What would make it work?
Well, there's two ways to think about what a fair trade agreement would look like. One would be the process under which it's negotiated, and if we truly believe in democracy, then all groups have to have a seat at the table when these agreements are negotiated. They can't be negotiated in secret like this, in ways in which even our legislators cannot read the text, while corporate so-called lobbyists are able to read the text of the agreement right now. Online, our congressional representatives can't. So one issue is a trade agreement negotiated in a fair and open process by which all affected groups at least have a seat at the table. Right. And then the other issue is we need to worry about real problems. Whether we have a trade agreement or not, we have a dramatic problem of increasing inequality in the United States. It's kind of correlated with the beginning of this push for free trade, although I wouldn't blame it all on so-called free trade. Okay. But we have to worry about the distributional effects of these agreements. Who exactly is being helped? Who is being hurt? That's the discussion we need to be having, not a closed-door discussion about property rights.
The word free trade always bothers me because, I mean, well, of course it plays on a little free market nonsense, which is just like phony economics, but it's really corporate trade. And, it's you see so often in the economic debates generally, this free market rhetoric is used to actually push corporatism, and that's what these agreements are, is they grant corporations power.
Well, what I try to encourage students to do is, rather than saying free trade, say deregulated international commerce.
That's a lot. That's a mouthful.
Now, it's a lot. It doesn't trip off the tongue quite so easily. And, the word freedom is so loaded in this country.
It is.
Right. But to call it deregulated commerce, I think exposes it more for what it is. It's not an evil thing. It's not the panacea that it's made out to be. But it's not really about freedom either.
No.
And this is what we need to focus on.
It's about corporate power. And
I mean, for the most part it is. And this has been true under both Democrats and Republicans going back to at least the early 1980s.
Now, the U.S. Trade Representative, they had, of course, 600 corporate advisors who helped them negotiate, or helping them negotiate the treaty. People from Monsanto and General Electric they love outsourcing.
Yeah, we actually have a list of all 605 on Flush the TPP.
Flush the TPP. Yeah. And they did allow us peons to have opportunities to talk to them as well. We went to a Virginia negotiating round, and they had a day for stakeholders. And I was able to go in as a stakeholder and ask them a question. And they were
And what was the caliber of the response?
The caliber response was, we're going to ignore the question and not give you an answer. You can speak, but we're not going to listen. Right. And my question was, are you going to allow democracy when this gets to the Congress? And they said, we haven't decided that yet. So,
well, the other issue with the word trade is that most of the goods moving back and forth, or at least a good chunk of them, are moving within the corporate structure. So it's not as if, this is back in the days of David Ricardo and Portugal is trading wine to England for cloth and all these lovely fantasies that are in the economics textbooks. These are goods moving within corporate structures through supply chains. And especially given what's happened recently in Bangladesh, one of the things that ought to be on the agenda is what is the liability of corporations when we have the death of hundreds of people in their supply chain. I mean, I think that's a legal question.
And of course, what the TPP will do if it gets put in place the way it's currently what's been leaked is if a country like Bangladesh puts in place worker protections, companies will sue Bangladesh for the lost profits that they expected because those regulations will cost them.
Undermine.
The TPP
well, right now that issue is being fought out on a number of fronts.
That's right, it is.
And,
it is.
Where that's going to go, I'm not sure. But TPP, as it's currently constructed, would not help.
Now, you mentioned in the first segment that these are really about property rights. I think that's a really good way of framing it. And in fact, what we talk about is how the TPP puts profits before people and planet. And we want to reverse that and put people and planet before profits. How can we set up a trade agreement to accomplish that kind of a goal where people and planet become a priority?
Well, I think the campaign that Citizens Trade has been doing is having some impact in getting information out there. I think the Green Party, to the extent that it especially can reach out to younger people to draw them into this political process, will really create a new source of pressure. I know, I'm getting up there to where my kids are going to protests, and I'm staying home encouraging them. So I think the extent to which we can engage young people to see this as about their future is critical.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of myth around the TPP, as there always is, around things that the corporations are doing. I just wanted to quickly mention that I had published an op-ed in Al Jazeera about the health effects on health of the TPP, and it got a lot of comments, and a lot of the comments were from like pro-corporate, pro-TPP people, and one of them was arguing that, we can't let all these people negotiate this agreement. It's hard enough to make these agreements as it is. If we let all these stakeholders in, it'll just be chaos. It'll never happen. And I was wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, that's fine. I mean, you can't. That's why we have representative democracy. We have groups represented by people.
Yeah.
But the current slate of people who are represented is a little bit slanted.
Just a little.
Yeah.
So it's not a question that we should do this as a group of 300 million people. We're not going to do that. But who is at the table? And who's actually writing these laws? One of the words that, besides free trade, that always bothers me is lobbyists. Lobbyists are supposed to be in the lobby, not in the room where they're actually writing the law.
I like that.
So these are not lobbyists.
Right.
Fine, representative democracy is great. Let's have it.
Yeah, represent more multiplicity of views.
That's right.
Where's labor? Where are the environmental activists? And consumer interests. They're not in the room. They're not allowed to really have much participation. So, do you have any sense of the stoppability of this? We've looked at. You mentioned earlier on the WTO has failed to really move forward since 1999. There have been a lot of trade agreements that have failed. Do you think that if we get organized and active, we can stop this?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm not really sure. One of the reasons it's been negotiated in secret was to kind of forestall the opposition that people like Ron Kirk knew would come. So whether it can be stopped or whether sufficient pressure can be put on to amend it to make it less worse, we'll see. I expect this to come down in the fall. People seem like they're getting organized this summer. It's unpredictable why these things fail. So, for instance, in the late 90s, there was an agreement called the Multilateral Agreement on Investment.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of taking that Chapter 11 from NAFTA and making it general for everybody. And that failed because some activists released the text on the web and people began to learn what it was.
Yep.
And we're horrified. And I think that's why Margaret's example of the health impacts of TPP are important, because people don't think that health and trade are related.
Right.
And yet these agreements are related to so many basic aspects of the quality of life that once people understand them, they're a little bit more motivated.
It will really it'll affect every aspect.
And the big
food
ones,
you eat, the healthcare, everything.
The environment, wages, our internet privacy protection.
And lots getting out. I mean, we have on popularresistance.org an article about the Flush the TPP campaign. It's one of the top stories up there. If you go to popularresistance.org, we lay out the plan of how we're going to stop this. And we feel pretty confident it can be stopped if people get active.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're probably right. And what I hope comes out of this in the bigger debate is really a serious discussion of what is a corporation and why are we giving rights to corporations that none of us as human beings have.
And that's not just now it's not just corporations have human rights, they're now getting governance rights. We're essentially setting up a whole, everyone's afraid of the New World Order kind of stuff. And what the New World Order is what the TPP lays out, basically. It's a corporate-powered, legal system with trade tribunals. The judges are corporate lawyers ruling for the corporation and going back to their corporate job. It just gives governments a way, corporations.
Well, it undermines food and product, safety of food products.
That's right.
It potentially undermines the provision of education and health care.
That's right.
The access to medicine, agriculture. These are wide, and again, it's because it's not about trade.
Right.
It's about property rights.
Right.
And I can't say that often enough, and I've probably said it too many times.
It's a really good point.
I have to keep saying it's as a friend of ours says, it's absolute corporate power over your life.
Absolute
that is a sad thing, but true.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Richard. Is there a website where people can check out what you're doing?
Well, right now I'm changing over because I just left one job for another last Friday. So not right now, but soon.
Okay. Well, let us know.
We'll keep watching for you on the greenshadowcabinet.us.
Absolutely.
You can go there, that's for sure.
Great. So we're going to go out on this break, and we'll be back afterwards with Kristen Bifus. This song is called Global Economy. It's another Ryan Harvey song. He's
Ryan's
just so
the best,
good.
man.
He hits it right on the head.
1 cup of coffee, $1.50. Guy who picked the coffee didn't get 3. Stuck in the belly of an industry that doesn't care about people. Working on the hills on stolen land, picking at the earth with a scuffed bare hand, sweating for the profit to some rich man that doesn't care about people.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
I'm a third grade teacher.
I'm a school bus driver.
I am a parent.
I am a teacher's aide, and I agree to be identified
as a caring adult who pledges to help bullied students.
I will listen carefully to all students who seek my help
and act on their behalf
to put an immediate stop to bullying.
I will work with other caring adults to create a safe
learning environment for all the students in my school.
In my school.
In my school.
In my school.
I'm Dennis Van Rokel, president of the National Education Association. Help us create safe, bully-free learning environments for all students. One caring adult can make all the difference. Be that adult and take the pledge at nea.org/bullyfree. Adults have the power to stop bullying in our schools.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
Bully-free. It starts with me.
Visit nea.org/bullyfree. A message from the National Education Association.
This is Kimon Freeman, host of Speak Easy and co-founder of We Act Radio. Suicide is a very serious problem in today's challenging world, whether with our troops abroad or with everyday citizens within our own society. Before you take your life into your own hands, tie a knot at the end of your rope and call the suicide hotline toll-free at 1-855-320-LIFE. That's 1-855-320-LIFE. It may just be the most important call you ever make. You talk, we listen, and together we survive.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how
I speak from Pennsylvania's death row.
A bright, shiny, highly mechanized hell.
Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the lost souls of the revolution.
And they're trying to figure out how to shut him down entirely.
They have moved heaven and earth to stop his voice being heard in the United States.
When you talk about groups that are maligned and slurred as terrorists in the major media, they're really small fry. They're retail terrorists. Wholesale terrorists are the United States government.
The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to.
On the move. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. In the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is at a crucial stage. Please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
What's up, everybody? This is Frank Knuckles from the legendary Roots Crew, and you're listening to right now We Act Radio. Stay tuned, stay locked.
One diamond ring, a few grand. Kid who mined the diamonds lost his hand. As a message from the soldiers who run the land that are funded by diamond corporations. Wealth derived through poverty from the lingering cuts of slavery in the form of an export economy controlled by diamond corporations.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin's using that was Ryan Harvey.
He really hits it, doesn't he?
He's also, by the way, a Bradley Manning Support Network organizer now. So BradleyManning.org if you want to follow his work there.
Yeah, and I wanted to quickly mention, because there was an ad about Mumia Abu-Jamal, we just posted this morning a letter from his lawyer on popularresistance.org because Mumia is currently being punished. He believes it's for his writing and speech, and there's information where you can call the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections and tell
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
I suspect we're going to learn something from Kristen.
I think we're going to learn a lot from Kristen. You write in your article that the TPP is an attempt to revive the stalled expansion of the World Trade Organization. Could you start out by telling us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, since I'm talking to you here in Seattle,
That's right.
And perhaps many of your listeners were involved in the People's Uprising in 1999 of the WTO round that was happening here, seeking to expand the reach of the WTO. And since that People's Uprising, there hasn't been, that round never actually concluded. You know, it's talked about as the Doha round, and still today the issues linger on. And so in some ways we look at what's happening today with the TransPacific Partnership and other trade agreements almost as an extension of our success, where corporate interests, government interests realized that trying to do too much with too many countries at one time was going to create equal resistance on the streets and in all those countries. And so what we have been facing, because that there was a little bit of a cascade effect after that defeat. There was another free trade area of the Americas in 2004, which was an extension, a thought-out extension of NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement, which we know we've now had for about 20 years. So that was in the early 90s that was passed. And that also failed. So the Free Trade Area of the Americas failed. And then in 2005, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, barely passed. I mean, it literally passed by a couple of votes.
So these trade agreements can be stopped.
Absolutely.
And what's the key to stopping them?
Well, first off, the key is information. For those who worked on the WTO shutdown in '99, majority of everyday folks hadn't heard of the WTO, didn't know what the WTO was.
That's right.
And it was a huge effort during that year of organizing, connecting issues cross-border, letting people know what the WTO stood for. Because what we find is when people know what's happening under NAFTA or what could happen by WTO expansion or Free Trade Area of the Americas, by and large, they're against it, right? Like 3/4 of folks polled here in the U.S. feel NAFTA was not good for U.S. workers, was not good for the economy, that offshoring of jobs is ahead of deficit, ahead of high costs of healthcare in what's causing our current economic recession.
So the first phase of stopping a trade agreement is education.
And I just wanted to point out that because we had an article that talked about all of the countries that we have free trade agreements with, and in all of them, our trade deficit was actually growing.
That's right.
And the countries we didn't have agreements with, it wasn't growing by as much.
Exactly.
So, I mean, they don't work in
There's
our interest.
no question that NAFTA was bad for the economy.
Bear that out, yeah.
And both, not just ours, but Mexico's as well.
Right, so
okay, education's first, then what? I mean, okay, people know about it, then what happens?
Absolutely. So you know about it, and then it's making the connections also cross-border, because what we have found with the resistance that arose around NAFTA, WTO, and CAFTA, huge cross-border efforts. So what happened here in the U.S., starting in 2000, or even before, but the Peru agreement was passed in 2007, there were these bilaterals, right? So it was a bit of a divide and conquer, where the U.S. was facing free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama and South Korea, and Canada was facing their own, and Mexico was facing their own. And now with the TransPacific Partnership, we have this opportunity to revive what we're calling these anti-NAFTA networks or anti-NAFTA networks, because it makes it much more powerful when people are working together across different, across country lines, making the connections, putting pressures in different ways. But what we have found is we haven't won trade agreements in Congress. It's been when people have come out into the streets and made it politically unsavory for the trade agreements to move on.
Politically unsavory. I like that word, unsavory.
Absolutely. So for people to activate, because it does touch, I think, the WTO shutdown in Seattle, helped bridge issue areas, right? Because I think there are so many fronts that we are all working on every day.
Right.
And trade is really unique in the sense that you can connect everything back to trade, right? Labor, environmental issues, access to medicine, forced economic migration.
Internet privacy.
Internet privacy. So it's really an opportunity for solidarity.
It really is, and it's an area where corporations have not been able to wedge as much as they have on other issue areas, where we hear frequently, jobs versus the environment, and really trying to separate out our movement and pick off our allies. And in trade, that's just much harder to do because different sectors have been able to make the connections. We talk frequently, we use the shorthand term offshoring. And I've been really challenging that because it gives this impression that good jobs are leaving our country and good jobs are going to other places. And absolutely that is not the case. We're losing good jobs, and poverty wage jobs are being created in other places.
Exactly.
And one of our members, and we have 66 coalition members.
Oh, great! Thanks.
But I talk about like the pulp and paper workers are members of our coalition, and I talk about them as the new environmentalists, because initially there was a lot of horrible feelings when they were seeing their processing plants moving to places like China and Indonesia and other places, and then they went over there and they visited. And they saw what was happening, how the workers were being treated, how so many environmental protections on treating effluents, hard-fought wins here in the U.S. were being literally rolled back, and the exposure of workers there. And they realized this is not about worker against worker, that workers in all countries are being impacted, communities in all countries are being impacted. So it creates incredible solidarity. It's awful that solidarity has to come from that place.
Right.
That's a strength, though. That solidarity is key, and it's not just important for trade, but something we can then build on later. What I love about what you said so far is it's pretty much the plan that we've laid out, and you've been part of helping to develop the plan, so it's not surprising, for Flush the TPP and the campaign to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership. First, education. Visibility actions to show the public what's going on specific aspects of this. And second, focusing on Congress with outrage and anger in the streets, both at home and in Washington, D.C., and really trying to get to the point where this is such an unpopular concept they don't want to even consider it in Congress. Right. It reminds me a lot of what we did with the super committee when that was going on during the Occupy, when we had Freedom Plaza, because they were there the super committee could do anything, and they were going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, Social Security, and balance the budget, and they were afraid to do anything because of the outrage we showed. I think that's the key, and that's the strategy we're approaching. So I'm really glad to hear that it's worked in the past.
We have to take a quick break, and then love to hear more about kind of the timeline of what's been going on with the TPP, what's been that cross-border organizing that's been going on, and more about what fair trade would actually look like. So this is a song called "Make IT Fair." It's a rap.
Make IT fair.
Behind every product, there's a supply chain. You need to know about it. It's part of the game, and you participate in it. So let's get with it and take a small trip through business. Hi, I work in a mine in Congo, Africa. Got to provide, so I work all the time. I'm digging up a mineral, it's called coltan, and it's essential to all calling. Even though I'm 10 years old, I'm hacking boulders, all the while supervised by scary soldiers. I make $2 a day, but what can I say? I have no choice but to get paid. Hey.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to WPWC, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. In the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal's at a crucial stage, please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
Yo, word on the street is they got an NSA mixtape bike ride going down July 4th, 5 o'clock at We Act Radio, 1918 Martin Luther King Avenue in Southeast Anacostia, Washington, D.C. But you ain't heard this from me, man. They got us on the run, man. Whistleblowers on the run. They already got my man Michael Hastings. They blew his car up. They got him. Eric Snowden's on the run. They got WikiLeaks stuck up in the Ecuador embassy. Can't go nowhere. I mean, man, Joe, you know what time it is, man. They got your emails. They got your phones. They got everything, man. So don't fax this. Don't send this out. Just word of mouth, man. Keep it on the low. But you ain't heard it from me, man. July 4th, 5 o'clock. At We Act Radio, 1918 Martin Luther King Avenue, Southeast Anacostia, Washington, D.C., man. Massive bike ride, man. We're gonna blow the whistle on you, motherfucker. Man, you do something, man. But you ain't heard from me, man. Yo, I gotta go, man. Do something.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ewing. I'm here giving something back to the community. I went to school here. I lived here in the community. I have an office here on Minnesota Avenue. I always loved D.C., just trying to give something back to the community of Ward 8 in this community or from around the country. We Act Radio, do something.
I'm a businessman, those are my planes you see. I fly minerals from Congo to Kigali. You ask questions, it isn't me. I just chilled in my hotel with a martini. Make it fair, you gotta make it fair, make it fair, make it fair, make it, you gotta make it.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese.
Yeah, that was an interesting break, that secret whistleblower.
July 4th, mixtape NSA ride around 5 o'clock at We Act Radio.
That's right. So we're talking with Kristen Bifus from the Washington Fair Trade Coalition about the TransPacific Partnership. And before the break, Kristen, you were talking about how a number of trade agreements have actually been stopped. We kind of outlined the campaign that's being put in place. Can we talk a little bit about the timeline? This negotiations have been going on for 3 years. Can you give us a sense of what's been going on over those 3 years and what the timeline is this fall?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and just to add, I mean, this trade agreement's been under negotiation in different forms since the Bush administration, right? So it hails out of his administration in 2007. It really started, and then President Obama put it on hold his first year of office, trying to decide, right? Because as we might remember, he ran on a promise to renegotiate NAFTA.
Right, in a more fair way.
Had to figure, just to remind of that point.
Yeah. And something changed his mind.
Sorry?
Something changed his mind. From
corporate cash.
Yeah.
So he, 3 years ago, or even more now, decided to pick it up and rename it, right, as his signature trade agreement, and move forward with it. However, as you know, countries can join, Pacific Rim countries, it's open for them to join, which is a huge difference from other trade agreements that are finite. NAFTA is only 3 countries, no other country can join.
Right.
And so over the course of the last year, we've seen Canada and Mexico join. They joined last December, which really does make this sort of the backdoor renegotiation of NAFTA that we had feared. And then this next round in Malaysia in July is where Japan is going to join. Against huge resistance in Japan, as you all know. And other countries are lining up. So
it's interesting I think that's a really good point you made. I hadn't thought of before, how this is a backdoor renegotiation of NAFTA. We should make that a bigger argument, that this will make NAFTA even worse.
Absolutely. Well, and that was why we had a cross-border, that's why we kicked off the cross-border network at the end of last year with the event on December 3rd up at the Peace Arch. And it involved communities from Mexico and Canada and the U.S., which was really to draw attention to the fact, because Canada has been involved in their own trade fight with the EU and then other side trade deals with China. And so this was to focus folks in Canada on the TPP and the first round that they would be a part of. But there's other countries, as you know, from Thailand to the Philippines, even China is talking about the potential of joining on.
I don't see how China could join. This is like their whole economy is so different from the model, that the neoliberal model that they put forward.
It really hurt their state-owned enterprises.
The whole state-owned enterprises, transportation, energy, healthcare. I mean, I don't see how China can do it.
Exactly, and that's why it is really interesting, because we had been hearing that this was actually, the TPP was actually seen as creating a bloc that is coming closer and closer to China, right?
Right. So we encircle them militarily and then economically.
With the Asian pivot, and now we do it economically with the TPP.
Right.
Absolutely. So initially, President Obama, in his State of the Union address this year, talked about concluding these talks in October. But with Japan entering into it and haven't actually apparently laid eyes on the text, we're hearing that is very unlikely. There's too many issues. They're too far apart. And they've been having these kind of rash intercessionals between the last round, which happened in May in Peru, and this upcoming round, to try to bridge the gaps, because there are absolute gaps in where different countries are positioned on certain issues.
Right.
And those are the gaps that we're looking to expand with our work. And so we're hearing spring of next year.
Wow.
Is much more of a possibility.
Holy cow. That's a
I know,
long campaign.
Well, that's good. That gives much more time to educate and organize it.
That is good news.
I'm excited about some of the things that you've been part of at the last round of negotiations in Peru. You did a webinar during that negotiation so that people around the world could, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, and also what happened at the last rush round of negotiations in Vancouver.
Sure, absolutely. And then also just to underscore how important Japan is entering the TPP, because we also had been hearing that there's a potential that TPP would not move forward until Japan entered into it, because it is an economy of huge proportions.
Third largest.
And so it's really actually in many ways driving. So it'll be interesting to see how Japan has an influence.
Right.
And also the Japanese people, because, a small rally in Japan is 6,000. So there's been huge protests in Japan.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we've been connecting to with the TPP cross-border, right? Because we're getting calls from the Japanese media saying, where's your resistance? We just covered 6,000 people on the street. Where are your folks? And that was sort of how I entered that article with kind of musing on that. And that is one of the reasons why we had the webinar with activists in Peru, because it's easy to feel isolated, right? We can feel isolated in our work. We're here in Washington State. We're having an event in Seattle. We're having an event in Spokane or Bellingham. And we want people to feel that they are part of a global resistance
right.
to this fundamentally flawed trade model.
Exactly.
That we're not the only ones that feel this is flawed. There is widespread agreement, and that it's the corporations' narrow-mindedness on their profits that keep moving forward on a model that has been proven over the last 20 years is broken.
Right.
Exactly.
Time and time again. And so we're hoping to continue on the TPP Exit Border website. We have solidarity statements from folks in Japan and New Zealand and Peru and other places, so that people are feeling this growing resistance.
And you have a North American tri-country unity statement that organizations can still sign on to, right? If there are organizations in the United States or elsewhere that are opposed to the TPP, can still join that statement. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was jointly drafted with allies in Mexico. And then, so it was jointly drafted in Spanish and English and then translated into French. So we have it in 3 languages. And so important to look at, to offer the historical lens of just what has been happening in Mexico and our other countries that we have free trade agreements with, and what were the promises. And looking at what needs to happen in the future, because this model is fundamentally broken and really unbelievable. I mean, all of the promises, right, and really challenging this idea, which was put forward by President Obama in the Union Address, that to get out of this recession, we need jobs, we need to increase.
What a lie. This is
right?
not going to create jobs.
And that's what's laid out.
Yeah,
right?
so, but there are positive alternatives, which actually you include, I think, on your website, the Washington Fair Trade Coalition. Can you talk a little bit about the positive alternatives to these types of agreements?
Part of what we feel needs to happen is a real education on what historically has happened with trade deals that have been in existence, right? It's the 20th year of NAFTA. And so when you talk about NAFTA, if you go into any labor room and mention NAFTA, it's very clear people know what happened.
Right.
So I think looking at what has happened historically and putting a pause on more deals that are getting us deeper and deeper into this model that's not working.
Right.
And so a couple of years ago, it was supposed to be a marker bill called the Trade Act, which is an acronym for the Trade Reform, Accountability, Development, and Employment Act. And it was literally to put forward a positive platform. And it included a renegotiation, right, which we heard a lot about during the campaign season, both from candidate Obama, candidate Clinton, recognizing, giving voice to the fact that workers and communities have been hurt by these trade agreements. And then talking about who's at the table, right?
Right.
And the fact that there's a lot of side agreements, but looking at the core text, it's not rocket science. There are labor standards, international labor standards out there, and we're asking for those to be included, for there to be not a regression of standards, right? When you look at the strides that have been made in global health and environmental health in communities and what communities are fighting for, the recent case of communities in Quebec fighting to put a moratorium on fracking and not banning it, but just saying, hey, we have no idea. We need much more science focused on this to know how this is impacting our water, how this is impacting our communities, and the fact that they're not even being able to do that without there being some repercussions. And one thing that we found, which was fascinating, and when we were up at this emergency teach-in that we had around this very secretive intersessional that happened a couple weekends ago up in Vancouver, there was a negotiating round that was focusing on the investor state provision in the TPP, which is what enables corporations the right to sue countries when they don't like their health and safety environmental protections. And there's this case in Quebec. The company is called Lone Pines, and we had been hearing it was a U.S. company, right?
Well, we heard it was headquartered in Delaware, right?
No, what we found when we were up there, Lone Pines is a Canadian company.
Wow.
And they're based in Alberta. And what they did, and you go on their website, and all of their work is in Canada. And what they did is they set up a little sham office here.
So they could be an investor. So they could be a foreign investor to sue. How interesting.
They can sue their own country.
I love it. Wow.
And I think we need to look into this because I think this
That's
might
a great
be an
story.
unprecedented use of an FTA.
They create a sham corporation in the United States so they can be a foreign investor and take advantage of those rights to foreign investors to sue.
And they're suing for like $250 million. It's not a small
to stop hydrofracking under the St. Lawrence River.
Right.
I mean, God, give me a break.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm hearing what you're saying, it makes me feel more confident. We stopped the WTA from going forward. WTO stopped a bunch of other trade agreements from being completed. I mean, probably about 10 or 12. We had the experience with NAFTA. We have already cross-border activism happening, rejuvenating from past fights. It's becoming clearly a global battle. And the delay that's going to happen is going to give us more time to get the education out. We're already geared up to really be pretty aggressive this summer and fall. I feel like we're in better shape than it looked like.
Well, and I want to thank you both because one of the biggest challenges is getting the news out, and it has been very difficult to get anything about the TPP in the mainstream media. And your work is essential.
Well, the lamestream media is not the key. I mean, I want to get it out there too, but we're going to do an article on this radio show next week in Truth Out, which will focus on the strategy to stop the TPP and what people can do about it and get people involved. I think it's really important for us to really get our core activated. If we get the activist base in the United States and around the world active, we'll have hundreds of thousands of people involved in this. Yeah. I mean, that's the Occupy was about 350,000 people, and that wasn't everybody who was active already. So we can really have a very large, very strong core group that will make this something that can be stopped.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, we have a strong history of organizing together jointly and connecting our issues. Because we're not saying stop working on climate change or stop working on whatever you're working on. We're saying make the link.
Exactly.
Make the connection to trade justice. And we're doing the same. Yeah. So it really is raising the profile of all of these issues that we're collectively working on. So it's a very exciting time, as you say.
Yeah. I feel very, very good about it. I appreciate your work all these years and that you can help people like us learn this stuff so fast.
Well, and likewise, it's very refreshing. And like I said, when we went up there, we connected with groups up in Vancouver, and folks who didn't even know about the TPP 2 days ago were already helping us organize actions and taking part in light brigades, and people are there and wanting to know what to do.
And it's all fun.
It is. Yeah,
it is. It's fun to take these corporations on. And if we win, it'll be really fun.
No, it is. I mean, activism has to be fun as well. But this is an issue that I think is a real priority that really unites us, and that we can win, and it will propel us forward in our struggle to put the people and the planet before profits.
Exactly.
So, Kristen, can you share with our listeners your website?
Oh, sure. So you can look at tppxborder.org. It's also on Facebook and on Twitter. And so a great way, and that's populated with folks from Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
Beautiful.
Right.
So we'll be putting a lot more up there. And then, obviously, congratulations on the new launch of
Flush the TPP. Yeah. Well, thank you for being part of that. We really appreciate your help.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, we're very excited. More opportunities for people to get involved is always welcome. More connections, more creativity is where we need to go. Absolutely. So it's going to be a very exciting summer, and obviously stay tuned for rounds that are happening in July, and then our own North America rounds. And we have no idea exactly where it's going to be, but it might be coming to the Northwest, and we like to think of the Northwest as a place that trade agreements come to die.
Let's bring it back to Seattle. Let's see if they learned that lesson.
We'll be ready.
Absolutely. Great. We want to also thank our engineers today, Kimon Freeman and Peter Callahan, for the great work that they did, making this show possible. And thank you, Kristen. And we're going to go out with a song from Junkyard Empire called We Want. The People Organized
can build a kind of
future we want. This is Margaret Flowers.
And I'm Kevin Zeese. Join us every Monday morning, 11 a.m. for Clearing the Fog.
Speaking truth to expose the forces of greed.
Start the week with your eyes open.
The fog.
The forces of greed that spin news stories for the benefit of the 1%.
Each week, we feature guests who are working to expose these truths and offer real solutions to the current crises we face.
Knowledge is power, and with knowledge, you will be empowered to act, to shift the power to the people.
Monday mornings at 11 a.m. on weactradio.com or 1480 AM.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
America and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Washington, D.C. We're talking with David Schuster of Take Action News, takeactionnews.com. David, you know, I got to say, growing up, my mother taught me a prayer. God bless those who risk their lives in defense of others. I'm not a fireman, but, you know, my goodness, we lost, about 19 firemen in Arizona, and God bless them and their families.
Yeah, so tragic. They were battling the Yarnell Hill Blaze, which is about 50 miles northwest of Phoenix. 19 firefighters. They were part of 18 of them were part of a very elite group, and they were trying to protect a small Arizona town. And a fire that suddenly quadrupled in size overnight. The 18 firefighters, 85 miles northwest of Phoenix, they thought they were in a pretty good position, but temperatures obviously were extremely high, record-setting in Arizona and Nevada. The winds kicked up, changed directions, and suddenly they were surrounded. And near as we can tell, according to some of the local reports, the firefighters deployed these particular tents that they are to crawl into to try to keep the flames away from them, to have the flames go over them. The problem is that if the ground temperature becomes too high, then even the tents, these special things that they crawl into, don't help.
Right.
And that apparently was the case. And each of them, took all the procedures, did what they did, and it wasn't enough. So I mean, this is the largest loss of life among firefighters since 9/11, and it's obviously devastating to everybody and first responders, law enforcement, the state of Arizona. I know firefighters across the nation have a heavy heart today, and it's just sad. And it gets to, wildfires are happen, and they seem to be happening with increasing intensity over the last several years as our planet gets warmer. But fact of the matter is that all these firefighters were doing exactly what they had been asked to do. They were following their training. There's no indication that any of them took any unnecessary risk. And they were all, they were battling to try to save a small town and help a couple hundred families keep their homes from burning.
Women from the get-go. You control women, you control the world.
Yeah. I loved. I don't know if you happened to see Meet the Press yesterday, but Jim DeMint tried to say, oh well, some women might, be happy to have a free, sonogram or whatever. And Rachel Maddow pointed out, no, this is forced on you. This isn't choosing to have this done. This is a mandatory transvaginal probe, right?
Yes, and I've had them, and they're not pleasant, believe me.
Yes, I listen.
Mine were necessary.
Believe you, and I know.
And I didn't like it when I volunteered for it.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just second that, sister. Amen. All right, 58. Not even with box wine and someone telling you you're pretty, it's not okay. 58 minutes after the hour. Right back on the Stephanie Miller Show.
At YMCA Summer Camp, where we believe in no child left inside. Arts, enrichment, sports, adventure, day camping, and wilderness. The summer for adventure has arrived. Do not be left behind. The Y is for everyone. Financial assistance is available. YMCAWNC.org.
Classic Cuts.
Rock and roll may be a young person's music, but it's never really too late to make it in the business. Bob Seger was a late bloomer, which is the thought behind his song, Against the Wind.
I felt like I made it so late in life. But when I was 35, I had the feeling it could have ended any minute. This is unusual. I'm older now and still running against the wind.
Classic Cuts.
What do your status updates say? What if every ounce of your being helped update the status of a person?
and in turn they did the same for you. Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps. Get interactive at peacecorps.gov/game.
iHeartRadio wants your feedback. Click thumbs up or down whenever you hear a song. And your feedback will help enhance your iHeartRadio listening experience.
From ABC News, I'm Stephen Portnoy. They were the best of the best, the elite firefighters they call hotshots, who dive into the flames to try to prevent them from spreading. In Arizona yesterday, 19 of them lost their lives trying to beat back a ferocious wildfire. ABC's Alex Stone is in the town of Prescott.
What's so tough for crews here right now, the firefight has to continue. This fire is raging out of control, so firefighters who may have been impacted by the loss of colleagues are on the fire line today working to contain the flames. Federal resources are on the way and should begin to help out local crews, but the fire keeps growing.
6,000 acres at last report, 0% contained. Deadly protests in Egypt over the weekend. 5 people reported killed, the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood torched. The demonstrators want President Mohamed Morsi to go, and the Egyptian military's just given politicians 48 hours to sort this out, or else. In Africa last hour, ABC News asked President Obama, should Morsi step down?
In his first public warning to Egypt's embattled President Morsi, President Obama firmly insists Morsi must start listening to his political critics.
Democracies don't work when everybody says it's the other person's fault and I want 100% of what I want.
President Obama says the U.S. is very concerned about the safety of American embassies and consulates. Cairo protests preceded the deadly Benghazi attack. Stephen?
ABC's Ann Compton traveling with the president in Tanzania, where tomorrow President Obama and former President George W. Bush will lay a wreath at the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania, where 11 people were killed in a terrorist bombing in '98. No transit service today in San Francisco. Transit workers on strike.
The issues are wages, contributions to pensions and health care, and safety issues as well. And according to union leaders, they are extremely far apart on all issues, specifically